A commonly cited piece of investment advice is to not put all of your eggs into one basket. The logic behind this advice is to diversify your risk. If all of your eggs are in one basket and something happens to that basket, well, then you've lost all your eggs. Similarly, if you put all of your money into one investment, or you only have one source of income, and something happens to that one investment or that one source of income that you have, your financial loss could be quite devastating and maybe rather difficult to recover from. So diversification is recommended. However, the benefits of diversification only outweigh its costs up to a certain point. And then after that point, the cost of diversification start to outweigh its benefits. Going back to our analogy with the eggs, distributing your eggs amongst two different baskets may reduce your risk substantially with very little downside. However, distributing your eggs into 20 different baskets may require an enormous amount of effort to monitor and maintain. The more baskets you add, the more difficult it becomes to justify the added overhead of the additional basket with the reduction of risk that you're gaining. Similarly, it is rather easy for me to keep track of 2 investments, for example. However, keeping track of 10 investments is a full-time job. Keeping track of 50 different investments would be near impossible for just one person to do. In addition to monitoring costs, increasing diversification will often not only limit your downside, but your upside as well. So for example, it's possible with one stock in your portfolio to achieve a 1,000% return if that stock increases in value 10 times. However, if you want to achieve a 1,000% return with 10 different stocks in your portfolio, that means that the average return of the 10 different stocks is 1,000%, which is at least 10 times as hard to do. So a trade-off is happening here. The more diversification you have, the less likely it is for you to go broke, but also the less likely it is for you to beat the market. On the other hand, the less diversification you have, the more likely it is for you to go broke or experience a substantial loss, but also the more likely it is for you to beat the market. Now the question that suggests itself is, how many different investments do you need to distribute your money into, or how many different income sources do you need to have in order to reach optimal diversification? The answer to this question largely depends on the level of correlation between the income streams of the investments in your portfolio. And correlation here simply refers to the way in which one asset will change in relation to the other. Consider 2 assets, for example, asset A and asset B. If the correlation between asset A and asset B is positive, that means whenever asset A increases in price, so does asset B. If the correlation is negative, that means whenever asset A increases, asset B decreases. And then when the correlation is 0, that is, these assets are uncorrelated, this means that a change in the price of asset A gives us no information about what we can expect in terms of changes in asset B. The correlation between the assets in your investment portfolio will determine how well you are diversified, much more than just the number of assets in your portfolio will. Positively correlated assets don't provide much diversification since they're all moving in the same direction at any one time. Negatively correlated assets may provide some stability in returns, but also at the cost of reducing returns, because when one asset moves up, the other asset moves down, and so your return is going to be somewhere in the middle of the 2 movements. The best type of diversification comes from assets that are uncorrelated, because with uncorrelated assets, you can reduce your risk without reducing your potential upside. To illustrate the effect of correlation on diversification, consider 2 different portfolios, Portfolio A and Portfolio B. Both of these portfolios has 2 stocks in them each. Portfolio A has ExxonMobil and Chevron, 2 companies whose prices basically move together in the same direction. They're both companies in the oil and gas industry. You can see Chevron's stock price in red while ExxonMobil's price is in blue. Basically, you'll notice that the price movements of these two stocks are identical. So even though this portfolio has two stocks in it, because of the strong correlation between these two stocks, the fact that it has two stocks and not just one added very little diversification. Now consider portfolio B that has ExxonMobil and Sunrun, for example. Sunrun is a United States-based provider of residential solar electricity. In this chart, ExxonMobil is again in blue, whereas Sunrun is in red. You can see that the correlation between these two stocks is less tight. In fact, in some instances, the correlation may be negative since Sunrun provides solar energy, whereas ExxonMobil provides competing fossil fuel-based energy. Therefore, the good fortune of one may mean the misfortune of the other, since the products that both are producing are replacements of one another. It's important here to notice that when the economy is slowing down, like what happened when COVID first hit in February of 2020, both stocks pretty much tanked. This highlights the importance of diversifying across asset classes and not just diversifying across assets. And we'll talk a bit more about this later. So even though both portfolios only had two stocks in them each, they both had very different levels of diversification. And the reason for this is because the correlation between the two stocks in each portfolio was rather different. The strong correlation between the prices of Chevron and ExxonMobil left the first portfolio A, with virtually no diversification, whereas the less tight amount of correlation between Sunrun and ExxonMobil left portfolio B with a non-trivial amount of diversification. So now the question that suggests itself is, well, how many different assets or asset classes do you need to have in order to be diversified enough? Well, famous investor Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, one of the largest hedge funds in the world, wrote a book in 2011 called Principles. I highly recommend reading this book, not just for principles related to investments, but also for principles in life in general. In his book, when he talks about diversification, he recommends 15 uncorrelated income streams. Consider the following graph illustrating the relationship between number of assets, correlation between these assets, and risk reduction. The x-axis is the number of different assets in a portfolio. The y-axis is the variability in the portfolio, basically representing risk. And the curved lines of the graph represent the reduction of risk for every combination of number of assets and correlation between these assets. Now, you'll notice that the red line that Ray Dalio recommends, where there is 15 different assets in the portfolio, when there is 0% correlation between these assets, the reduction of risk is around 80%. If you look at the green line, where there is only 5 uncorrelated assets in the portfolio, the reduction of risk in the portfolio is around 65%. And just going from one asset in the portfolio to 2 assets in the portfolio, where the blue line is, reduces risk by around 30% in that portfolio if the 2 assets are uncorrelated. So you can see that the biggest bang for your buck happens at the left-hand side of this graph, where the number of assets is smaller. And then the marginal benefit of additional diversification starts to go down the more assets you add into your portfolio. Now, while the number 15 uncorrelated assets may seem reasonable for a hedge fund, I don't think that is a reasonable number for a personal investor. Something that doesn't show up in the chart I showed you is how much knowledge and understanding the investor has about the assets in their portfolio. And this knowledge and understanding, the more of it an investor has, the less risky that investor's portfolio is. So while a hedge fund may be able to have adequate know-how and knowledge and understanding of 15 different uncorrelated investments, for an individual, this is very difficult to do. My sweet spot is between 3 and 5 uncorrelated income sources. That's what I strive for as a personal goal in my finances, to have between 3 and 5 uncorrelated income sources. Less than 3, 2, or 1 income sources seems too risky to me. More than 5 and it becomes too hard to monitor the different investments adequately, and I'm not sure you're getting enough diversification to justify the added monitoring costs of that 6th or 7th investment. Now, when I talk about 3 to 5 different sources of income, my aim is to have these sources of income come from different asset classes rather than just from different assets. And the reason for this is that all assets in the same asset class are pretty much correlated. You can only really get 0% correlation or close to 0% correlation when you compare different asset classes with one another. And an example of different assets would be Tesla stock and Slack stock, for example. However, an example of different asset classes would be stocks and real estate, or commodities. That's another asset class. Or BFF's income share funding agreements. By the way, I should mention here, you noticed in February of 2020, when the COVID-19 first hit, the entire stock market got hit. So whether you were diversified or not diversified in the stock market, you lost 30 to 40% of your portfolio value if you just held during this period. However, as it relates to BFF's human capital investments, the fund that I started in 2017 that until this date has only made profitable investments and has had a risk-adjusted return that was superior to all of the major asset classes and is open to anyone who earns at least $200,000 annually, BFF's human capital investments experienced a volatility of precisely and exactly 0. So it had 0% correlation with the overall market. So I really think it is a great option if you're looking to diversify your sources of income, especially since our investments pay monthly dividends. I think it's a really good option to diversify your sources of income with an asset that has 0% correlation or has had 0% correlation with the market overall. If you have any questions or you would like to inquire further about BFF's human capital investments, you can find more information and reach out using the link in the description below. So in summary, diversification is definitely a positive, something that you should strive for. However, too much diversification and the marginal benefit of the additional diversification may not justify the costs that come with that additional diversification. Make sure you're diversifying across asset classes as opposed to just across assets. And perhaps the most important investment is the investments that you make in yourself and your personal skills and your ability to add value for others. And then finally, my personal rule of thumb is to strive to have between 3 to 5 income sources, streams of income that I'm familiar with, that I've done my due diligence on, that I can monitor with a reasonable amount of effort. You want to make sure you don't reach the age 50 or 60 and you're just completely reliant on your employer for your living. You have no other streams of income. And God forbid something happens to your employment and basically you're devastated financially and you have to go into panic mode. So you want to avoid getting to that point. Now, if you're looking to get started with investments, and I highly recommend you do this if you have your cash reserve situation sorted out, so you have enough cash for the foreseeable future. One of the best ways to invest is in stocks. And a broker that I've had a very positive experience with so far is M1 Finance. They take a portfolio approach to investments. They don't allow day trading, basically, because they have certain windows in which trades happen every day. And one of the benefits that I've discovered to M1 Finance that is really cool is that after you set percentages for how much you want of each stock in your portfolio, let's say you put 80% Tesla, 10% Slack, and 10% Teladoc, for example, every time you add money to your portfolio, it will invest that money in order to return your portfolio to the target percentages that you've determined. So that basically automates a lot of the previously manual work that you had to do in order to rebalance your portfolio every now and then. And so I found this feature really useful. Now, if you'd like to try out M1 Finance, it's a completely free app. And if you'd like to try it while supporting this channel, then use the link in the description below. I hope you found this video beneficial. And if you did, I kindly ask that you leave a like, subscribe for more content. And until next time, make sure to take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you all.